Are you ready?
Let's get it.
Yo, what's up? It's your boy D Starks.
Starks our artist.
And you're tuned in to the Justify Podcast. We're talking everything faith, life, and culture. We back.
We here, man.
Another week. One more. What, episode 35? Gotta be.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah, that's gotta be the one. But look, if you've been tuning in for a while, you've been rocking with us, welcome back. And we've been growing a lot recently. So if you tuned in for the first time, welcome. And yo, as I said, if you've been listening, you know, you love the content, everything we're putting out. If you're listening on a podcast app, Apple, Spotify, Google, whatever it is, go ahead, write us a review, leave us a rating, and we appreciate y'all. Much love.
Hey, and for those of y'all watching it on YouTube, you know, make sure y'all like, comment, subscribe, hit the post notification bell so y'all can stay updated when we post. Appreciate y'all for tuning in.
Well, for sure. But look, we're going to go ahead and tap in. I'm excited for this one. Yeah, so we're going to go ahead and get into it. Because this is one, every time we put anything up on our Instagram, whether that be a poll or question box about, what would you all like us to like talk about, have a conversation on, this one always comes up. We get a lot of messages, comments, DMs on asking about this topic or this subject, and people just having like, questions on what this really is and wanting us to cover it. And this was really interesting to cover or even like do study on going into it, because it was one of those things where I didn't even really know. It challenged me because it was one of those things where I didn't really know if I knew what it was or how to describe it. Like, it's one of those things where I'm always hearing and talking about, maybe even saying myself, but it's like, do I really know what this means?
Yeah, like, what is that?
Yeah, and basically so what this is going to be about is all about spiritual warfare. Mm-hmm. All about spiritual warfare. And this is one of those things I like to call like Christianese. You know what I mean? It's like one of those buzzwords in the church and the Christian community that everyone's always claiming, talking about, like, I'm going through spiritual warfare. Like I'm fighting this. I have heavy spiritual warfare this week. I hear that a lot. Like, and it was just like, dang, okay, what does that actually mean? What does that look like? And I think when it comes to spiritual warfare, particularly like obviously like for Christians and us talking about it, I think it's important to start with what it is and what it's not. Yeah, because I know I saw something on Instagram a while ago. It was some post, and it talked about how it was like, are you really fighting demons, or are those just the consequences of your actions? Oh. You know what I mean? Like, is this really spiritual warfare, or are you just reaping the harvest of bad seeds that you've sown in the past? Right. I know people that be they car break down. They and they start binding the devil. It's like, bro, you ain't got an oil change in 8 months. Like, go ahead, bind the devil. Take that bad boy to the car shop. Get an oil change. But no, all jokes aside, it is like spiritual warfare is something that is very serious. It is something real. So I'm not saying that to minimize it at all, but it's something that we hear so much, I think, sometimes, and in different ways. It's like, I think it's important for us to actually know what it is and what it's not in different situations and things like that. And starting this off, one of the things that we have to realize, like as Christians just in general, and people who are walking out their faith with God, that I wasn't always aware of when I first came to Christ, is the fact that, like, although we do have a God that's for us, we also have like an enemy who is against. He's against our devotion toward God, against the plan he has for us, and against everything he wants us to walk into. Right. Do you feel what I'm saying? And so we have to realize that there is an adversary whose entire goal is basically to like destroy our lives and deter us from everything we're meant to walk into. Exactly. So I think that's always important to realize that like there is like a spiritual fight. Just as much as God has a plan for your life, so does the enemy. Oh, yeah. I think that's something that's always overlooked, and that you go through different things in your life. There'll be heavy like mental instability that you're going through, or situations that like pop up out of nowhere, and you're like, like, where did this come from? What's happening? And it's like, like, that may be spiritual warfare that's going through. But we have to understand. But sometimes it gets overlooked of like, it was so unintentional. You know what I mean? It's like, that just so happened. It's like, like there's a fight going on, and like try to get you away from what you need to be doing. Yeah. So that's why it's important to always understand that like we do have an adversary and an enemy who's like always at work trying to, ultimately get those who are really living for God and stepping into purpose completely away from that track. Oh yeah, for sure. And when it comes to spiritual warfare, also it's like, this is more than just the ups and downs, the regular ups and downs of life. Like this is like intentional attack that the enemy is trying to come against you. So like I mentioned, this can come in the form of like mental instability, like high stress, like anxiety, or you at your school and things are just all hell breaking loose there, like on your campus, at school, on your job, and you just have like a moment, a week, a few days, a month of things just like being completely out of place. And that's really like, what spiritual warfare is entailing. I mean, outside of just like the regular ups and downs of different days of like, yo, like you really like just going through it. And so when it comes to spiritual warfare and like in terms of, you know, everyone talking about, oh yeah, like I'm fighting the devil, like I'm fighting the devil. I'm like, you know, I'm in battle with the devil. And it's like sometimes I think growing up, I always thought that when I heard that like the devil was, you know, like red, you know, redhead, two horns or some like, you know, physical type of thing. Yeah. And it's like, nah, that's not even close to it. Like the devil is going to show up like in your thoughts through lies, operating through people, different environments, situations, environments that are taking place in your life. And I think that's always the first thing that's good, important to note, to like understanding what it is and how to like identify it.
Yeah, for sure. And I think another thing that I've noticed is that the enemy can also show up in the spiritual warfare and like manifest himself like through other people, you know? So I think one thing I had to understand is just realizing who your real enemy was and what that real enemy was. Like you were talking about, like it's not, you know, how it's portrayed in movies. Like what really is that enemy? Like your enemy isn't, you know, that person spreading rumors about you, or, you know, that teacher you feel like has it out for you, or those friends talking behind your back. Like they're sort of just like conduits to like something deeper, right? In Ephesians 6:12, scripture I want to bring up, it says, "For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms." And another scripture, 2 Corinthians 10:3-5, talks on this. It says, "For though we walk in flesh, we are not waging war according to the flesh," right? So basically through these scriptures, it's saying our battle is not physical, but in a spiritual, right? These things you're seeing with your eyes in your day-to-day life, it's ever just like, it's tools, it's conduits. There's always something you can't see influencing something you can, right? There's always a root, and like roots can't be seen. So it's really deeper than what you can see. I think for a lot of us, like you were talking about earlier, the enemy has succeeded in keeping our eyes and our focus away from him and how he's actually moving and what he's actually doing, right? I think one of his main tactics is keeping our focus off of him and on things that are just going to keep the cycle continuing. Like, for example, I'm not sure if you guys are too fond of like, you know, war movies or like video games and stuff like that, but that's something I've kind of like fond of and I like getting into. So, and I've noticed like when I'm watching these movies and playing these games, like a common tactic of these war people going against other armies is like going for the commander. Right, because they understand if I go for the commander, the one calling the shots, then the battle's all but won, right? Like I can take down the foot soldier, but it's like another one's gonna take his place. I can take down that one, another one's gonna take his place, right? So one of the main tactics of this war is like, okay, I have to get to the one calling the shots, right? And it's kind of like the same with the spiritual warfare. It's like we're dealing with what's at face value, but it's like if we get to what the root is, if we get to where the person that's actually calling the shots, where he's at, and it's like, okay, we can really be more effective in how we're dealing with these issues that we're facing, right? And the thing with that is like the enemy, like we say, he doesn't have a physical form. He's working in a spiritual. So we're trying to fight spiritual battles in physical ways, and that's not how that works, right? So basically, I think we just have to get out of the habit of taking everything at face value and realizing that, like I said, there's usually always something influencing what you're actually seeing in the physical.
No, yeah, and when it comes to like when people are talking about spiritual warfare and how it's gonna show up in your life, that's how it's gonna happen. It's gonna come through like different people, different environments, different situations, like that professor's irking your nerve, like them people that are like literally like putting their name in your mouth for no reason
at all, like I don't know,
like starting rumor, speaking on your name, like out you got like, you know, even family. So it's going to happen through like different environments and situations, because it's like it's not always that person, but the spirit that's influencing them, kind of like what you were mentioning, right? Like the enemy can use like, you know, different people to ultimately like advance his agenda, whether people are aware of that or not. Like
sometimes they're oblivious to it.
Yeah, sometimes it's subconscious. It's not like they're necessarily like demonic or possessed or anything like that, but they could be operating under an agenda that is going to at some point cross your path and try to deter you from the path that you're on.
Exactly.
You mentioned this a few weeks ago. We were talking about like everyone's always in a perpetual state of worship.
Yeah.
So it's about what are you worshiping? Like everyone's always being influenced by something, whether they know it or not.
Exactly.
And so sometimes people can be, you know, under the spirit of like anger, of strife, of discourse, you know what I mean? And that show up within your life in different environments that's like now trying to like disrupt you. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And so that's how that's really gonna show up. So although these things may be coming through a person, like the agenda behind these actions are larger than we think. Are way larger than what we can fathom, and may be like the of the enemy essentially. And I like how you mentioned that we have to be aware of this because, like I said in Ephesians 6:12, it talks about how we don't fight against flesh and blood,
Right.
because we can get in these moments like, oh, dang, they talking bad on my name. Like, hold on, let me step real quick. Who is this? And now, like, I'm exerting all my energy, all my time, all my effort, and trying to fight the wrong battle. Now I'm caught up, right, in all this stress, this anxiety, and this worry on all these things in front of me, when the real battle is the thing that is unseen.
Yep.
And I remember I heard it listening to this one message, and it talked about how, like, the enemy wants us to focus on the flesh and blood, because at that point I'm gonna start throwing their weapons at the wrong culprit.
That's good. I like that.
I'm gonna start utilizing these weapons at the wrong culprit, and as long as I can stay here in the physical and what's happening, like, right in front of me in these people and these environments and situations, then the enemy can still run rampant.
Yeah.
Right. And continue on the path that he wants and that he has, and that he wants us to move into. So that's always important to know. And that's one of the hardest things that I had to really understand and start to realize. It's like, okay, like, when I'm seeing all these things in my life that, like, this person that's speaking about me, right? These people that are setting these things up behind my back or whatever it may be, they're operating and being influenced by something that they may not be aware of.
Right.
And then that changes your perspective, right? So, like, when I'm seeing all these attacks come my way, I'm like, I see you, devil. You know what I mean? Like, and now I'm not wasting my time getting into, like, these petty arguments and disputes, like, with all this small minuscule stuff, and I'm taking that to, like, my prayer closet, right?
Exactly.
What we'll talk about later, going to Ephesians 6 and, like, putting on the full armor of God and what that looks like, and understanding the real fight. So, like, I have energy for that, because sometimes we can just, like, get off kilter. You feel what I'm saying?
For sure. That's a good point. I think even in a way, it kind of increased my patience with people. Cause it's like, cause it's
that's
like,
good, bro.
When they were coming at me in a certain way, it was like, okay, I realized this ain't really them, right? And that doesn't mean like excusing what they're doing, because at the end of the day, like, that is their action. But
and they'll be held accountable, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I mean, there are going to be consequences for that action. But like, now that I really had the understanding of, okay, there's something else at play, right? So I wasn't directing my anger towards that person, right? Yeah, no, I didn't think about it that way, but definitely increased my patience and understanding for people's actions and how they was doing.
And how did you say it earlier? Everything we see is being influenced. What is it?
Everything visible is being influenced by something invisible.
Everything visible is being influenced by something invisible, or that is which is unseen. So that's always important to note. And then once you have that perspective of, like, that there's a spirit operating within every one of us that gives you a different perspective, that gives you, like, more patience and discernment on how to navigate different things. But no, that's good for real.
And something else I had to realize about the topic, and something that really helped me understand it more, was really just kind of like the origin of the war, right? Because people are talking about, like, the spiritual warfare and how there's a war. I'm like, okay, like, what war? How did it start? Like, how did I get involved in this, right? And the way it was explained to me, or the way literally the Bible lays it out, is, so there's two kingdoms, right? Well, initially it was just one kingdom, the kingdom of heaven. And then we know the story about how Lucifer rebelled. And then there was a whole battle and he got kicked out of heaven. And ever since then, there's been two kingdoms. So there's a kingdom of God, also referred to as the kingdom of heaven. There's also the kingdom of darkness, also referred to as the kingdom of air in the Bible, right? On Ephesians 2:2, it references it. It says, the ruler of the kingdom of the air, the spirit who is now at work in those who are disobedient, right? So there's two kingdoms, right? The kingdom of heaven's victory is set in stone. Like, since the beginning of time, like, God's going to win this battle is inevitable, right? So, like we were kind of touching on these two kingdoms, they both have two different agendas for your life. So God's kingdom, he wants you to share in his victory, right? That's his agenda for your life. But the enemy, Satan, aka, he just doesn't want to lose alone, right? So now we're caught in the middle. Like, Satan's trying to take everyone down with him, while God's trying to get us to share in his victory. So basically, that's the whole origin of this war and exactly what's really going on. Because, like I said, we kind of throw it around, but when I really got to understand the origin of it and, like, really what's happening and how I got played into it, it allowed me to get a lot better of an understanding of the topic. So, yeah, just understanding, like, there's two kingdoms at play, and they're both sort of, like, in a trying to tug for your attention and tug for your like alliance to them in a way. Yeah, so basically, ultimately, this war, this battle that's going on is basically just a fight over you, over your soul, and over who you're and over who you're ultimately going to allow yourself to be influenced by.
So no, yeah, that's good. When it comes to spiritual warfare, the fight or this battle, like you said, is over like your spirit and your soul. So everything, every tactic, every move, every strategy that the enemy wants is to basically push you further and further from your obedience to God and to move into the agenda that he wants out of your life.
Yeah.
So, it's like, okay, dang, let me see if I can get them away from peace today. Right. Let me see if I can get them anxious. Let me see if I can move them away from staying solidified in God and to move further into fear. Oh, you want to walk in love? Let me see if I can, ruffle them feathers a little bit,
Right.
and move you into like hate, right, or strife, or anger, or jealousy, right? Yeah, and then instead of walking, by the Spirit, let me see if I can get you to start operating more in the flesh. Like all these things are just to push you away from that into like the agenda that he wants. And so when all these things are happening around you, that like you got people at school acting out of character, you got classmates, you got peers, you got coworkers, you got professors, you got your parents, family, people are close to you in your inner circle that are doing maybe doing different things that may not be like them, or just like hell breaking loose like in your own environment or your situations. All this is to move you away from what God wants out of your life, right? So that drama wasn't there just to be there, it was to see, okay, like, can I get them to bite?
Yep.
Do you feel what I'm saying? It's like, oh, okay, this report from this doctor, right? Or this comment from this professor, or this situation happened at my job with my boss, my coworker, no matter what it was. It's all to see it's all like maybe influenced by the enemy to like see, okay, how off kilter can I get you? Can I get you operating in my agenda, and I can get you further away from God?
Right.
And that's the whole point of all of this, and even different thoughts that you may have, like in that mental instability, like just like depression, like anxiety, all this worry and fear from different things that may be outside your control. It's all to like just disrupt everything that you have going on and to move you away from what God has for you.
Yeah, exactly.
And then when it comes to fighting like all these, I guess these moves that the enemy may be making, or spiritual warfare in general, I think there's always like some misconception that, you got to be like binding the devil, screaming at hell in your prayer closet, like, bind you, devil, and all that. Like, and that may be a part of it, right? Because that's the power that God has given us to bind and loose different things, but that's not the totality of it, and that's not always the case, right? And when it comes to like how to fight spiritual warfare, a lot of people always reference, and like basically the blueprint is in Ephesians, right? Ephesians 6:10-18. Like everyone fighting, going through it, needs to go and study that passage of scripture, and it talks about basically putting on the full armor of Christ, like the breastplate of righteousness and the belt of truth, and different things of that nature. And when it talks about putting on the full armor of Christ, like one of the questions I'm always thinking about, like, how do you even do that, right? Like, how are you supposed to put on this armor? What does that actually practically look like? And in Ephesians 6:18, it talks about how that we need to pray and do that through the Spirit on all occasions. And that's what I've learned, is that that's a part of putting on that full armor of God. When it talks about righteousness, when it talks about putting on the belt of truth and things of that nature, that's going to come through like your communion and your connection to the source and God himself. And I think I heard like this, that one time, is that sometimes we get in the habit of praying when we get into spiritual warfare, when we haven't even prayed before it came. And what happens is some of us don't know how to stand strong in the Lord because we haven't been standing with him at all.
Ooh.
And so when it comes to spiritual warfare, even when it talks about it in Ephesians 6, one thing that I didn't know is when it talks about putting on the full armor of God. In the Greek, when you go and study it, it talks about when it says put it on, it's a one-time thing. You're supposed to put it on once.
Right.
And it be something that stays with you. You're not supposed to take it off. You're supposed to put on this armor and be something that you now carry around on you, with you, for like the duration and eternity of like your battle and your fight.
Right.
So that's why it talks about in the Bible how we should pray without ceasing.
Right.
And that's because we need to be always prepared, like at all times, in any situation, right? No matter what attack that may come, that I've been standing with the Lord. So in those moments where that spiritual warfare is hitting at a high level, and it may be in a different season, I know how to stand strong and stand firm in him and with him during that season and during those moments.
Yeah, that point about that continual prayer, that reminds me of the story. It was in Mark 9:29. Basically, it was a story about how a man came to the disciples with his son who had an impure spirit, and he said that they couldn't cast it out, right? So he's like, okay, let me go to Jesus direct. So he goes directly to Jesus, and what happens is Jesus ends up commanding the spirit to leave, and then it did. And then his disciples later asked, like, okay, how did you do that? Like, why weren't we able to cast out, that impure spirit, and you were? And then he responded, this kind can only come out only by prayer. But when you look at the sequence of events, Jesus never prayed in that moment. He commanded the spirit to leave, but he never prayed. So what he meant by that is like a continual prayer, a different type of prayer, right? A perpetual prayer. That's what he meant by that. Not when the moment comes. When the moment came, Jesus didn't pray. He commanded it to leave, right? So he said these can only come out by prayer, continual prayer, different type of prayer. Not when it comes, not when it's here. So yeah, no, I think that's a good point. That just kind of reminded me that there's certain issues that come that that quick 2-minute prayer ain't gonna do too much about, right? It's about that continual prayer, right? And that's how you keep on that armor, right?
Yeah. He's already equipped, like before that moment had come, through obviously the power, the reverence, and all the things that he had gained through prayer beforehand to obviously be able to handle that situation and stand firm in God.
Yeah.
And we also have to realize that like spiritual battles require spiritual strength. And that's the biggest thing in fighting against spiritual warfare is that you're not going to do this like obviously through your own strength or through the flesh or in the natural world. That's going to come through supernatural power and ability that only God can provide. That's mentioned in Ephesians 6. Because sometimes we're trying to reach God or do the work of God or walk with him independent of his spirit. And we can't do that. Like we need his spirit through everything in every moment, especially when it comes to spiritual warfare. Like these spiritual battles require spiritual strength, spiritual weapons, right? Spiritual arsenals, right? And different things of that nature that we always have to be very, very aware about. So like it's always about, I think I mentioned this last week, but like what is your first response? So I mean that can even apply here in these situations of like, dang, like, am I going to exert all this energy, like, okay, trying to confront all these people, or am I now going to like go to God with this, right? Am I now going to try to and fight all the insignificant battles that aren't going to actually get to the source of my issue, right? Of what mental instability I may be going through, or things that maybe situations happen around me, my family, or am I going to take this to my prayer closet, right? Put on like this full armor of God and fight it through that. So I think that's always important to understand. And then also, spiritual battles require spiritual insight. So what a lot of people always call discernment, because we have to understand the schemes of the enemy to properly fight the attacks that come from him.
Right.
So that goes back to what I mentioned earlier with like, are you fighting demons, or are these just consequences of your actions? I know I was joking there, but that's why you need like this discernment and insight from the spirit to realize, okay, like, whoa, what is this tactic? What is the enemy trying to do here? What's happening in my life? Like, what is causing these things to happen or take place? And, that comes from just like seeking God, and he's going to like give you that revelation to discern these different things. Like he wants his children to have these gifts, like to be able to discern warfare and things and battles that may be happening in their life. So that's always important to understand. And obviously the more you start understanding spiritual warfare, you realize that, where the fight is actually at. And now you have a shift of perspective through this insight and discernment that you now have. And then also something I had heard that I never heard before, that was really interesting when it came to spiritual warfare is that like, your obedience can be a form of, fighting against that. Like just walking in the will of God and what he has for your life, disciplining yourself day to day and every moment, every hour, whenever you don't want to actually follow his plan, his will, or go by your flesh and your emotions, actually stepping into that and giving him your yes, and just resisting the devil, that is a part of fighting spiritual warfare. You know what I mean? I was like, that was really interesting, but it makes sense. Like when I started studying, like, if the chief goal is to like deter me or get me off track from what I need to do, actually walking with God is fighting that attack and then saying yes to him. And so that was really interesting and like really practical, but it was like, okay, it's bringing it down. It kind of brought it more down to earth of like, my day to day, giving him my obedience, giving him my yes. Instead of like clapping back at this person, right, and showing love, instead of instead of going straight to worry and fear, actually like going to him in prayer and petition, casting my cares to him, obedience and keeping his word close to my heart, that can be just me actually fighting and resisting the devil and stepping into what like God has for my life and things like that.
Mm-hmm. That kind of reminds me of, like, because you were talking about how your obedience can be a form of, like, fighting off the spiritual warfare, right? And, like, protection from it. And ultimately what that looks like is denying your flesh. And someone had worded it, they said fasting is, like, the atomic bomb of, like, spiritual warfare. You know, like it's like a really powerful weapon, because when you look at fasting, what it really is just like you're denying your flesh, right? And denying those desires and ultimately like the enemy's agenda, right? And you're saying yes to God. So when he worded it like that, I was like, that's a good point. Like that can be a very good form of like fighting all the spiritual warfare is fasting, right? And denying your flesh. So yeah, I think that's a good point.
Nah, yeah. But no, yeah, those are the biggest ones. So just really understanding that spiritual battles require spiritual insight, you know what I mean, that you need for spiritual battles, you need spiritual strength. And, you know, continuously and always putting on the full armor of God through prayer, right? And fasting, discipline, obedience, whatever that, you know, what that really looks like practically. And ultimately, you know, staying close to God. But yeah, you got what's good? We got anything else for the people? You got something to leave them with? Ending off?
No, I just want to say, man, I'm glad we finally got to touch on this topic. Like you said, it's something a lot of people are asking for, and this is one of those topics I feel like everyone needs to understand, because I think once you truly see like the world for what it really is, it becomes a lot easier to like maneuver through it, right? So just understanding that like it's deeper than what you're just seeing with your physical eyes, right? Just kind of reiterating what we've been saying. It's like when you really notice that fact, the walk becomes that much more. I don't want to say easier, but I mean it's hard to fight something you can't really understand and see. So once you really understand and see it, you can now do what you need to do to combat that, right? So, yeah.
No, yeah. And I just say, like, whenever you are going through the season, going through these moments where, like, you're feeling a high level, like, adversity or attack against your life, whatever that may look like for you personally, it's always about, like, understanding spiritual battles require spiritual strength and standing strong in the Lord. And when you put that armor on, keep it there. Right, staying consistent in obedience with God, and close to Him. And then whenever these moments come, you're going to have the fortitude, you're going to have that strength, you're going to have that spiritual awareness, and then just the altitude and the fortitude to like go through this and understand the tools that you need to ultimately fight it. And so that's the biggest thing. Once you put it on, keep it there. Keep it there, and that's what it's meant for, to protect you and ultimately shield you at all times through these different things. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all I got.
I like that. Keep it there.
Keep it there.
Yeah, it's tough.
You got to keep it there for real. So look, stay you,
stay real,
and stay humble. We'll catch y'all next week. Much love.